let's get started here. Thanks everybody for jumping on. I think this is at least a very interesting topic. I think when I posted it, people were, thinking that I was the one trying to set up a union or something. I'm like, no, I just want to talk about it. I think it's really interesting. And Rob was one of the ones who kind of egged me on to jump on this, as per Kier's article on Simply Faster about unionizing strength coaches. And obviously that there's a context there within the college system, but I think there's certainly a broader sort of topic we can explore here around coaching and just getting organized. So Rob, one of the things, or a couple of things that you brought up about, one, the logistics of doing such a thing, and then we'll get Bob to jump in too. And I want everybody to comment on this, but Rob, you had some specific points that you made, and we've talked at length about the differences between, say, athletic trainers, physical therapists, and strength coaches, and what's the difference, and how come these other groups are so organized versus the strength coaches, and before they even consider something like a union, what are some of the issues that have to be addressed?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to hear what others have to say, and especially Bob, because they're in that environment more than I am right now. I could just, to me, it's three or four factors, and one is how do you unionize if you're not responsible for the revenues? So what I mean by that is when you have an automobile auto union strike, you're not making cars, you're hitting the owners in the pocket, right? If the strength coaches, and I'm not saying they're not of value because it's performance and injury prevention, et cetera, but if the strength coaches go on strike and the players and the coaches still take the field, tickets are sold, concessions are sold, TV contracts are honored, revenue's still coming in. So how is the union of a strength coach going to affect revenues? And I'm not sure how many coaches or how many players are going to say, I'll forfeit my occupation, my living, I'll forfeit my scholarship, I'll forfeit my ability to go to the pros. And if I can't go to the pros, I'll forfeit the last years I have to play sports and organize sports for the rest of my life for a strength coaches union. And I'm not saying they would, I'm not saying they won't, but you've got to think about all these things. So I'm not sure how a strength coaches union affects revenue. That's the first thing, all right? Because that money talks, as we all know that. The other thing is that the strength and conditioning field, in my opinion, right or wrong, they need a governing body, right? So I'm the strength coach, I'm a physical therapist, I'm an athletic trainer. I have the American Physical Therapy Association, one venue, one leadership, one entity for all physical therapists that established a curriculum that everybody has to go through. And then you have to take your licensure exam. And so you cannot practice unless you're licensed. The NATA has one governing body, the NATA. You have to go through an athletic trainer's curriculum and pass their certification exam. And certain states also provide licensure. And so since you have to have these curriculums and these prerequisites of licensure or certification, that limits the scope of the people that can practice in the field and thus can assist in what you're paid or et cetera, right? Strength and conditioning doesn't have that. And it's been a long time where the field's been established. I don't know what the delay is. I'd love to hear what Bob and others have to say. And then my last concern is this. Well, I have a number of concerns, but the last point I'll make is this. The sport that started this whole thing may be the snowball that starts to end this whole thing. So what do I mean by that? The NFL has a CBA, right? And right now, it's not like when I used to work with Coach Parker and the Giants years ago, we used to have 20 to 22 weeks, depending on how the schedule was, in off-season training. Now you might have 3 to 5. And then you have your preseason camp where guys will lift, and then you have in-season, right? Okay. The president of the NFL Players Association has made a statement they want no off-season activities. They've proven through a pandemic that they can still give a quality product online, right, on the field. And so if the Players Association comes to an agreement with the owners, and there are people I've spoken to about this, and they say, well, there's nothing to worry about because you have a CBA's already signed. Well, anything is renegotiable, right? You could be divorced to someone, and if you need your ex's signature on a piece of paper for a business entity or some type, you could go to your ex and say, let's renegotiate this divorce settlement. You put your signature on this paper so I get what I want, and I'll give you additional what you want. It's always renegotiable. And the big negotiating point to negotiate a CBA, if the players really do not want to have any off-season participation, is to give the owners the 17th game, right? That's the bargaining chip. And so now if you think about strength coaches at the NFL, and I hope I'm wrong, I really do, people making 3, 4, 500,000 as a year or more as a head strength coach. And then you have your staff, right? So you're paying salaries, you're paying benefits, medical, you're paying retirement fund, whatever. You might have, give or take, $2 million, give or take, in an investment in your staff. You look at guys like Mike Boyle, presently Eric Cressy, Lauren Lando in Denver. As an owner, you could say, well, wait a minute. I'm going to take somebody who's in a strength and conditioning business. I'm going to hire them. We have no off season now. I'm going to hire them for off season and in season, and I'll pay the guy $500,000 a year to send him and his staff 3 days a week, 4 days a week for those 6 months, and I'm saving myself 75% of my investment. So if the players, the NFL Players Association, do come through saying, hey, I'll give you a 17th game, and this is just my hypothesis, I'm not saying this has been discussed, I'll give you the 17th game if you end the offseason. Why are you going to spend $2 million on a strength and conditioning staff? And so that could be, really scary. So, I'll just leave it there. And so again, I think you need to have a single governing body. I think you need to establish curriculums across the country. I think you need to have licensure and certification so that, not anybody can practice in the field. And then the last thing you need, and we could talk about this later on, is you need a seat at the table with the people making the decisions, right? So I was a physical therapist out of school 40 years ago. And over the years, through whatever process and how life evolved, I became a CEO and I sit on boards. And when you sit on a board, you have a say. And if you need help, there may be someone on your board who knows someone that can help you, or the person on your board can help you directly. But you need a seat at the table to make changes occur as well. And in strength and conditioning, I'm not sure how many people have evolved their careers. Football coaches have become ADs. Other coaches have become ADs. I'm not sure how many strength and conditioning professionals have become ADs or higher in an institution, like at the college setting, so they could have a seat at the table to make these changes. So I'll leave it at that. I've taken enough time.
Lots of points there. Thanks, Rob. We'll get Bob to jump in next, but I want everybody, if you want to jump in, I'll try and call on people, but at the same time, if you want to put your hand up, we'll get you involved. Lots of issues here. And it seems like one of the big ones is just getting organized as like you said, having a governing body, aside from the fact that people may want to unionize, but there's just no organization or unity, it seems, are not enough. And there's even in pro sports, there's still, I don't think there is this universal requirement to have certified staff. There's still lots of weird things going on, and maybe even at the college level. So Bob, what are your thoughts on some of Rob's points? What are some of the important points that we have to highlight here in terms of, standardization and perhaps exploring something like, collective bargaining?
Well, first I want to do all of us a favor, introduce one of my closest friends in the business and closest friends in life, Jim Malone, who's got extensive background. He was the head director of strength and conditioning with the Padres, the Mets, and as of recently, the Pirates, also a head strength coach at Campbell University for football. And in terms of the Professional Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coaches Society, which I helped to form with a few other guys. He was also the president of our organization of strength coaches in baseball. And he will tell you later here that, this union thing was right in front of us. like this and how that all goes. And but let me speak to Rob's situation. I mean, gosh, let's see here. I wrote a few notes. Let me just kind of figure out the whole union thing. Here, hold on, just up. Wait, hold on. Let me get this. No, I mean, it's pretty funny, right? And I do think it's funny. Although what's not funny is the theme of organizing, which is being unified, and that goes back to what Rob was saying with a governing body. Collective bargaining also is unified too, because it's called collective bargaining for a reason. Everybody's on board. Try to gather that from Maine to San Diego, right? And the revenue thing, Jim and I saw that in baseball. Remember when the umpires decided, like, hey, well, there's a bunch of us here that think, we're not getting treated right, and so we're just going to strike. Sandy Alderson has said, okay, well, you can just keep on striking. You're done forever. They never came back because there's plenty of people, because they're not the game. We were not the game. And, if it's the same old story. When you look at different situations, different not organizations, but professions, if you don't take that job for 25 grand, there's a line of guys that go, it looks like they're attending a Led Zeppelin concert reunion. It's going to be all the way down the street, and they don't give a shit whether it's me, Eric McMahon, Rob Panarello, or Krusty the Clown. They don't care, right? So you got to. I say that being kind of trite, but not really. I mean, it's kind of that way. So you have to consider all these things and the amount of effort that it takes to get going. One of the things that, as I was reading up on this, because I didn't, I'm not versed on unions, so I did some research like I would do for most things I'm not completely aware of. But one of the things that I didn't realize is unions aren't as prevalent as they are today. Jim and I were talking about this morning. Like when we were growing up, me, Rob, and Jim, union workers were, you join the union or we're basically going to beat the shit out of you in the alley, And for those of you guys that are waiting outside to cross the line when we strike, you probably may not have enough money to pay for your medical benefits that we're going to make you use if you should, breaking your windows, slashing your tires. I mean, it was not fun and games. I was telling Rick Slate this morning that my father and my grandfather were 35-year employees, for which, again, only a few of us know, the only phone company in town, Pacific Telephone and Telegraph. And there was another strong union. Now, one of the things that's crushed unions recently is deregulation. And deregulation in our case is anybody can get certified. It doesn't have to be the CSCS or the SCCC, anybody. Or, as you said, Derek, not at all. That's happening right now collegiately, even though it's a rule. And, increased competition, which would be, once, like, just to give communications as an example, once they deregulated and then you had Verizon and AT&T and all this other stuff happening, then competition changes, where the union represents. Because sometimes those companies, they want to be better than the other company. And so they don't want to have a collective bargaining agreement amongst them. And I think the last thing was labor mobility I saw. And that's a little bit less in our area, although labor mobility for us would be, there's so many people, it would be hard to gather them all together. That's just so I agree with the common theme that, we've got to be a little better and a little more united. And if you think a union is going to change your wage, you just don't understand unions, because, they talk about raising the minimum wage, like for us in baseball. Okay, first year player, we can go ahead and say, this is what that person makes as a big league contract. But that's for everybody in that league, right? So you have, in strength and conditioning, you have anywhere from, if you're at an institution, 20 grand, 18 grand to 750 grand. Okay, so let's raise that 25 to 30. Okay, How's that work for everybody? Not at all. It doesn't do anything. So the union thing's a little, and licensure too is a whole nother idea that's kind of ridiculous. But I want to hear what everybody else has to say, because this thing is, like Rob says, this thing gets really, really wide. And including, which I was talking to Rick Slate this morning about, who's the assistant strength coach for the Raiders. He said, what if not every state has licensures for athletic trainers, right, Rob? So you go ahead and even they, as as committed as they are, they still couldn't get all that licensure across all the states. So, we can't even get everybody to think along the same lines, but when you go in there and your first thing is, I'm going to join the union so I can get paid more money. That's typically the first thing that the employer doesn't want to do, right? They'd rather give you a car stipend and traveling money and education money, but then they start raising salaries, and that changes a lot of the game. So.
Yeah, and the whole pay issue, one of the things in Kier's article was, as the market has been flooded with aspiring strength coaches, a colleague told me that a job that he did 20 years ago now pays 50% less, and the same job I did in 2010 now pays, a lot less when you factor in inflation, and some people are getting paid $15,000 a year. In those cases, are you just saying like, well, find another line of work? Like, if this is the reality, why don't you just, not suffer?
Yeah, if it's money, then be Mike Boyle. You have no cap. You make as much money as you want, right? I mean, if you really want to make money, there's probably, when you think about it nowadays, your chances of making more money there in your first year versus a first year strength coach in college. I mean, even the NFL still got guys making only 5 digits that are assistants. And so if it's money, you should go in the private sector. You don't have to, you're not capped anywhere, minimum or maximum. Go get it. And you get to be your own boss, for crying out loud. So it's not, I mean, the money thing is, that's not it. And by the way, if you do, and I listen, I didn't do extensive research, but I did enough. Really, labor unions really, they more covered the highly skilled worker in craftsmanship. So when you talk about all these aspiring strength coaches, those guys are whacked. Boom, they're done. They can't get in and become good, because that skilled worker is going to get the look, because that's who they're taking care of.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bob. We'll jump around here. Jim, can we get some of your comments after Coach Alejo's fantastic introduction?
Yeah, good to see you guys on here. I haven't seen in a while, and hi to everybody else I don't know. Yeah, and Bob's referred to, we hopped on the phone quick this morning, and there are a lot of different rabbit holes you can go down real quick when you start talking about the idea of unions, and that's not to vilify or romanticize them. I think it's just our profession and the number of domains that it can be a party to. It just makes it untenable, I think, to think that we can pull that many people together and be utilized by that many different domains in a union or minimum standard of compensation type of model. It's just, and it's unfortunate. I mean, really, if you think about it, it's like going into entertainment, really. My wife is a SAG-AFTRA union member, and you're subject to the availability of work and also what you're willing to work for. And it's, you've got Division III schools, you got high schools, you got Division II, Division I, FCS, FBS, multiple professional leagues, and there are still exponentially more people that want to work than there are jobs available. So, I think the equivalent to doing local or regional theater would be the idea of going up and opening up your own facility. And you can have steady work. And if you do a good job and you're good at your craft, you can grow your business and if you are working with school age kids, from let's say 12 to 18 years old, and any kids that maybe are going off to college and coming back, for every 18-year-old that leaves, there's a 12 or 13-year-old that's coming in. It can be a very sustainable business. And that's something I learned from my wife, because she had a treatment for a kids show, and I learned a lot just in that concept from things that happen in the entertainment world. And then, again, just to get to the idea of unions, I mean, I grew up, my father was an iron worker, and then a fireman. So I'm very familiar with the union concept. I'm very familiar with what unions looked like in the late 60s, 70s, and early 80s. I can tell you from experience, and also from growing up with Rob, no disrespect, Rob Panarello, guys with a lot of vowels in their last name, that were whose fathers were Teamsters guys in Buffalo, New York. And there is a lot of truth or similarities to some of the romanticized and fantasy things that people see in the movies and maybe have no concept and think it's just Hollywood. It's not just Hollywood. But at the same time, I say that, and I say it partially kidding, but it's the truth. There's so much more transparency these days that it's a lot harder to operate in the shadows, so to speak. And just going back to what Bob said, the idea of highly skilled labor and people, banding together and looking out for each other. I think that in our profession, it's untenable. I hope that wasn't too rambly, but I think it's a great idea. It'd be nice if they could sort of just at least come up with minimum standards based on education and experience level, even if it was just some sort of simple Venn diagram that says, if you've worked at this level for X amount of time and you've got these credentials, and, come up with a formula so it's at least, fair and equitable for people. But, I think a lot of, people enjoy fitness and strength and conditioning and participating in it, and then trying to make a living out of it. And, they see that publication at the USA Today every December, and they think, I'm going to go make $700,000 a year. And they forget to really look at those, the group of 5 schools, and what some of those guys at the smaller schools that are still FBS level schools are making. And those guys are putting 60 to 70 hours in a week and making $120,000, which looks nice on paper, but when you break it down, you're making about $450 an hour. I mean, it's just, how long is your passion going to sustain you? It's hard to say. And what kind of connections and the people you meet along the way will carry you a considerable distance in this profession. And whether that's right or wrong, it's open to individual interpretation.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jim. A lot of good points there as well, and just the difficulty around organizing something resembling a union would be just crazy.
And I'll just add, and this isn't me crying the blues, it's just the business. I mean, I'm in the job market right now. I'm on the carousel. I spent 3 years in Pittsburgh, was brought in by a front office that I had relationship dating back to 20 years. That GM got out, new GM got brought in. The athlete development team that they assembled and built over the course of time, that was a group of us that had deep reaching ties, time and work-wise and relationship-wise. I think that we had a very nice and cohesive thing, but of course I did because I was part of it. And new front office came in, and hey, I have a different vision, and it probably was the least personal it ever felt, because it wasn't just me; it was all of us. Head trainer, assistant trainer, PT, myself, sports science. These days, they didn't even fill the sports science job; they just took those duties and spread them around. That's unheard of at this point. So, you just take a step back and you say, all right, well, they're saving money. Collectively, they brought in, and I don't really know any of the guys they brought on. I know the new head athletic trainer, and this is not to disparage those guys, but collectively, they've got half the accumulated experience than those of us that are not there anymore. They are, without a doubt, saving tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds. And to not even fill the sports science position just really goes to show that they're saving money. They're pinching pennies and burning hundreds. And they are going to be able to control the narrative much more than the unified group that we had there. Um, and I'm not, I don't want that to sound negative. I think it's just really, it is what it is. And, you know, I find myself in a situation now where, you know, where do I end up at 53 years old? Is it time to become my own boss? Am I the dummy who just really likes being part of the team collective and the team mindset, where you have people calling shots anymore that don't value that as much? It's become, there's always been money at the professional level and at the highest levels, but it is being run far more antiseptically, where feelings and relationships are not the priority anymore. It's numbers and financial decisions, financial considerations driving decisions, rather than those things being tools or parts of the equation. So
Yeah,
it's scary.
yeah, definitely. And I mean, some of this was brought on by this whole sort of college strength coach, and we know that the NCAA has been sort of called out for exploiting situations. But those of you in the private sector, like I want Lauren to speak up a bit here. How do you view this in terms of, and you have a lot of experience in working under different circumstances, but how do you look at this, and what do you say to people who are working for pro teams or working for colleges and feel that sort of sense of anxiety and instability?
Well, it's an interesting balance as I'm listening to everybody kind of present, because I've been on both sides, and I'm kind of private right now, but yet professional at the same time. I've had challenges where, you know, we were talking about, you know, the money you can make and how it's changed from, you know, a high level to a low level. And I think it's really a matter of supply and demand, and these relationships, because, you know, if you're going into a pro team and there's an opportunity for a job and they value you, well, you're going to get that high dollar value, if you will. But if they don't value you, but they still kind of want you, they're going to make you a low ball offer that you'll take it if you need the work, but you don't want to take it because it devalues the job. On the private side, there's challenges in of itself. So I've been on the private side and the professional side at the same time, and I could tell you, for me personally, the professional side has always been a greater revenue generator, if you will. The private side, there's a lot of headaches that go into that, right? Like imagine, I can't imagine I closed my facility in 2015 to move to Pittsburgh from Ottawa. And I can't imagine right now trying to pay rent, electricity, water. You know, you still have to maintain your equipment. There's some equipment that still needs maintenance during this pandemic. Like, how do you get through that when you have no revenues? So, I don't know. Like when I saw the topic come out, I really want to jump in because I've been an advocate for let's call it fair pay in the field for a long time. I've got a lot of friends making not a lot of money and working a lot of hours, and I just and you know, when you talk to them, they don't have a lot going on with their life. It's their work is their life. So I'm not sure where the balance is. I think it's just it gets to be, you know, where do you want to be? What are you prepared to accept? And because, you know, being a professional sport, there's some cachet to that, you know, aside from the money that you can make. But I know, like, all the general managers in pro hockey that I know, like if they even thought you were involved in something like that, you know, bringing a union together, it'd be like, thanks for coming, next. And, you know, it would be shut down, you know, pretty quickly. So it's I'm not sure if I really answered your question. It's kind of all over the map there, but it's challenging for the field.
No, I'm definitely interested in your thoughts to, because again, you have had this exposure to these different circumstances, and like you said, the whole, I don't know if the COVID thing has definitely amplified everything that Jim was talking about in terms of this like impersonal transactional nature of everything now. But
Yeah.
you're right, it is scary. I'd like to say like, hey, go into private business, but this is a bad time to go into private business and start something.
Yeah, like a lot of people don't know. I also have a corporate fitness business, corporate fitness wellness business. We go into workplaces and put in fitness wellness programs. And I've had that company for 33 years called Strength Tech. And over the last, we have not had any revenue since March 2020. I've 33 years we've had this company. The good thing about it is I've got no rent anywhere, no rent, no leases. The bad thing is I've had to let some people go who've been with me for 15, 20, 25 years. One guy who was with me for 32 years, and I had to let these people go because of COVID. And, there's no pensions, and there's just no money coming in for me to be able to help these people. So it's a terrible time, terrible time. I'm grateful that I have no lease or rent that I have to pay for these facilities that we were running. So it's, I don't know where the safest place to be is right now.
That's a very good point. And Ryan Banta, you are in a union. You're in a teachers union, and looking at this from your perspective, obviously you coach on the, as part of that. What are your thoughts on people saying like, yeah, being in a union will solve it?
Well, I obviously, if we're talking about pay, part of the problem is it depends on state to state. So the state of Illinois, they are allowed to go on strike. The teachers do frequently go on strike. And so therefore the Illinois retirement system isn't as solvent, but the teachers get paid a lot more money. So for the same amount of years and experience, the average salary difference between Missouri and Illinois is about $14,000, which is one of the reasons why living in Illinois is expensive, is because of those state funded retirement systems. And to jump on the Italian attack, since I'm Italian, I could say this, there's quite a few in Illinois that have, lived that old school ideal of hairy knuckled, short, bald, hairy men that, make things happen in back alleyways. But there isn't as many of those vowels in Missouri. But one of the things I would say to argue for the benefits of unions would be that even though you're not maybe looking at pay raise, you are looking at some sort of standards. You do have protection in terms of lawsuits, right? You do have the opportunity to negotiate. I know that they say, well, we'll just get rid of you. But, I think that there are some benefits to be a part of a union beyond pay raise. And, campaigning to, make sure that your local leadership, your local education, your local people, you can fight on behalf of, the PT people, the sports people, the strength coach people, to make sure that some of those things are done. So, for example, if we were unionized, one of the things that could get done is a campaign where everybody's on the same page to push your local leadership to open facilities, to not shut down the one thing that has been proven to keep people and give them a fighting chance of being healthier against coronavirus. I mean, if anything should be aware now is that, this body positive of a 350-pound, 5'6" person is maybe positive for their emotional state, but not for their health state. And there are things that can be done through a union that are beyond pay, that have benefits in terms of leverage, awareness, a unified front, writing campaigns or email campaigns to local leadership, fighting for you if you get in a sticky situation where you could get fired for somebody having an accident on site under your, watchful eye or whatever it may be, or if God forbid somebody passes away while you're doing some conditioning, and you're going to be the first person thrown under the bus and everybody's going to say you're a monster, when maybe what you did really had nothing to do with it, but the person had a lot of other things going on, and you as an individual have no way of fighting it, but you as a union could step up and protect and maybe save your job. So I feel like there are benefits, and I feel the biggest thing is that if we don't have, like big time Bob said, the ability to even have a unified front in terms of some of the basic things that we need, that needs to be done first, so that we can have that process in place so that we can get on board with a much bigger, grander scheme of a union. So my experience has been, I've never seen a pay raise because of it, but they tried to cut our pay early in the school year for coaching. We lost 2 weeks of our season, and they justified the 2 week loss of our season, which they decided to do because they were afraid of the public outcry and perception on coronavirus and us playing sports while we weren't in person at school. They cut our pay by 25%. Well, we bombarded the school board meeting, which they didn't expect us to be there. And so instead of having 11 people making decisions on our finances, we had 50 people in the room. And it's a lot harder to say we're going to cut your pay, even though last spring, many in the administration building took 15% pay raises on $250,000 wages. It's a lot harder to do that. So indirectly, you can save jobs, you can save some of your money, you can maintain a certain standard of expectation of pay for services due. You can protect yourself from getting fired as a scapegoat. So these are all things I think that, would be a benefit of a union.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, like, is the union required, or do strength and conditioning professionals just need to be better organized and better unified without the official union? Maybe just start a Reddit group or something and change the world. Um, Coach Wickard, Justin, you are not a strength and conditioning professional. You're a track coach, which I don't know where that is on the hierarchy, but it's very tenuous. And you went from being a university employee to going private. What are your thoughts on all of this in regards to?
Yeah, first it's interesting because the conversation I'm hearing from a college track and field standpoint, I get it all the time. I hear it from a college track standpoint. And can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I can hear it from, as track coaches in the college, we talk about this all the time. Like even with the, USATF and stuff, like I've been to conventions and they're like, oh, Power Five's talking this, and then the mid majors are talking this, and it's like, well, we need to be unified. Like people, come and say, well, how can we take you serious when you guys are not even a collective unit? We get this talk and then we hear this, like there's no one voice. And so it's cool to see that the same conversation is happening within strength and conditioning. And I would say, not just from a strength and conditioning standpoint, but I mean, we're all coaches. So I think if we all just sit down, no matter what we coach, and have a conversation like this, we'll find out like, man, we're actually sharing the same problems across the board. Well, now how can we as a whole, not just, strength and conditioning or, track and field or, the volleyball coach or, whatever coach, how can we better come together as a body to help? And for me now, again, I'm still young in this, but to me, I'm like, I've always felt like, like Rob said, like you got to have a seat at the table. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes about money. It's about money, but then at the same time, I've always wondered like, well, those that are sitting in that position, like the head track coach or, the head strength and conditioning coach that's got some pull, how are they able to make things better and change things? Because I know a lot of times like, yeah, I want to, but if I speak up, now I might lose my job. Because they're like, you're going against the goal, like you're stepping out of your realm, stay in your lane. Who are you to come and try to tell us, hey, I want more pay for my staff or vice versa? I mean, so I think the biggest thing is just, honestly, it's just doing the best to try to get the egos out of the way, of like thinking of ourselves and like, no, what can we do as a whole for the betterment of coaches? What do we need as a unit? Because a lot of people thinking of like, oh, more pay because they're thinking of themselves, and I think until we can get rid of that, it's always going to be the same, talk behind closed doors and afraid to speak up, in situations like, oh, I might get fired or I'm going to be considered, the black sheep.
Yeah, it's definitely a common problem, and I want to get some other pretty much everybody comment here. Mark Spellman, what are your thoughts on just this whole idea of unity within, say, strength and conditioning? Do we have the capacity to work together and say like, hey, let's standardize some things, let's get off our butts and really work as a group?
Yeah, I mean, I think we really need to. Being in the profession 25 years, almost 30 years, it's when I only see 20 people, 21 people on this call, I look and go, what are we thinking as a profession right now? And as Rob and Bob have said, one of the biggest problems is we don't have that aspiration to have a seat at the table. And who's doing the hiring? I mean, you have jobs that get posted and they're already filled. And I mean, I know that for fact. I mean, because I'll reach out to people at the universities that I know, and they'll post a job, and within an hour, I'll reach out to somebody to reach out to a coach at that school. And like, Mark, the job's full. Well, the job just posted. How's it already full? I mean, and then you look at, the thing of if somebody leaves their job, there's going to be 200 applicants for that position. And the person doing the hiring, how do they know what's the difference between somebody that's just getting into the field, somebody that's been in the field for 5 years, and somebody that's been in the field for 20 plus years? Obviously, it's experience. And with that experience comes a price tag. So they're not, the person that you're bringing into a director position or an AD position has that experience to do the job, to take care of the whole strength and conditioning, sports performance field, and take care of their staff. But there aren't those positions. When I was at universities, I started off answering to the AD, then I went to the senior associate AD, then I went to the director of sports medicine, and that was all within a 12-year time frame. So why am I answering to the director of sports medicine? Why am I not talking to the athletic director? It puts it in a conflicting position for myself and the director of sports medicine. The other thing I think is, when we're still arguing about, proper warm-ups, do you put your hands on your head to recover? Do you put your hands on your knees to recover? I mean, that just kind of makes us look like idiots as professionals. I mean, at the end of the day, who cares? So and also having the respect for one another as professionals. When you get into a new position, it's not your job to go in there and badmouth the person that was there before you. Be better than that, and understand that the person that was there before you probably did a kick-ass job, but for certain circumstances, they're no longer there. I would love to see us, probably not, I've always thought for like the last 5 to 10 years, the union would be great, but I don't know how realistic it is. But I'd like to see us come together as a profession to make the profession better for each other and for the ones that are coming up. And for most importantly, the student athletes that we work with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, some great comments there, Mark. Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from you is like we just need to be more professional. Like that seems to be, before we even get to discussion of unions and other organizations. But yeah, great comments. Eric McMahon, what are your thoughts on what we can do as a profession?
Hey guys, yeah, I wanted to jump on here and really just opportunity to listen. I feel like I get enough opportunities to speak and share during the week, but I wanted to hear this conversation because the article and just some of the thoughts that were kind of going out on social media. I think I'm actually really encouraged by the dialogue here and just how we're talking about this, because I think this is one of those conversations that can get pulled really polarizing one direction, and that maybe not the most productive way to talk about it. And just there's a ton of points I've been jotting notes down that that I've latched onto. And I think these are very intuitive for us. One thing from the article that really, and this was the organization of athletic trainers and PTs and RDs and all these other professions. I think at times we get a grass is always greener mentality outside of outside of what we truly know. And I have an example of a trainer or of a physical therapist working at the major league level, a very accomplished physical therapist. He has a CSCS, and his frustrations with the physical therapy profession were that insurance restrictions have really limited the amount of money they can make. And he was even considering becoming an LMT or using more of a CSCS and going more private sector, just because of the same types of challenges that we're talking about here. On the licensure and I kind of looked at this pretty high level from a union standpoint, because I feel like we're like a lot of the points here, we're pretty far from that for all the reasons mentioned. But from like a licensure standpoint, I think there's definitely there's not a lot of money in the pockets of people, and I hear a lot of the money grab concept of organizing bodies. And do strength coaches want to be paying their state to uphold a licensure, when we can look at professions like, well, hairdressers are licensed professions too, but they probably don't make the kind of money that we're talking about. And so another example of where sometimes fully, really diving into, what each of these things, these layers means, in the collective, just improving our work conditions, setting wage expectations, fair wages, like the ASCA and the article they mentioned. They have a nationalized system. It's a much different system there. But with that, it doesn't mean those things aren't possible. So I'm really encouraged by just the way this conversation's gone, because I think we can come together on some of these things. It just might take a unique strategy to accomplish that. Even if it just starts with kind of that union conversation, it may not look like that in the end. And so, but yeah, I covered a lot in there, and I could probably keep going, but I'm gonna let some other people share.
No, some great comments there, Eric, and maybe we hold the union thing over people's heads to incentivize them to get more organized and more, work on their profession, and not quibble about single leg versus double leg squats. Rob, you wanted to jump back in, Rob Panarello.
Yeah, I have a question, and then I just want to point out what I think is reality. And anybody that knows me knows that, I've always been on the side of strength and conditioning more than any other of the things that I do. But think about this, okay? If the pay is so low, and I throw this out there, I like the answer to this question. If the pay is so low, therefore the profession can't be that valued. So why isn't the profession that valued if pay is so low, right? If you want a great athlete, you have to get the highest contract. If there are a lot more people making 5 figures versus 6 or 7 figures in the field. So why is the profession so devalued in the eyes of the institution, the pro teams, et cetera? That's my first question. Second question is, and just a thought, as I said before, how is by unionizing hurting the institution or the pro team? If the profession's so devalued, how are you taking money out of their pocket? Ryan talked about the teachers union. It's a different scenario. Without teachers, the kids don't get taught, and you're just not going to bust all these teachers in who have to go through a curriculum, like I said before, and have to go through certain qualifications to be a teacher. They're not just going to bust them in, and parents are going to freak, and they're going to say, who's teaching my kids? you have something over the district and the state if all the teachers go on strike. If Power 5 football doesn't play, the school shits themselves, because how are we going to make up this revenue? Because it supports the rest of our athletic program. I mean, no offense to the gentleman that spoke about track and field. If track and field, in my opinion, try to go, and I could be totally wrong. I'm not trying to be disingenuous or anything. I'm a big proponent of track and field in all sports. But if you want to unionize, you may be the next men's team when they want to settle Title IX, when they get rid of a women's team. Because what's the revenue generation of track and field? So I go full circle. If the strength and conditioning profession goes on strike and they're devalued based on salary for whatever reason, I'd like to know why would anybody change anything? Why would the schools and the pro teams may just say, I won't have a strength and conditioning staff? You're not taking money out of anybody's pocket. You need to be able to affect the senior entity to make a statement, to have some power. And so that's what I think the big problem is. And so you have to create an organization with a leadership or a governing body that puts value in the profession. And that's just my opinion. So if someone could tell me, in their opinion, why is the profession so devalued? Because the profession is very important. I've never been able to understand that. But if it was so valued, then why aren't salaries higher?
So how do we change that? How do we create value, or at least the perception of value, Rob?
Well, listen, I really respect Bob Aleo, and I like Bob a lot, whatever, but I disagree with him with the licensure thing, because like I said, if you have a curriculum and you have a license and you can only practice the profession with that license and met certain standards like other organizations, right? The union, you have to go, if you want to be an electrician, you have to go through, or a plumber, you have to go through your whatever it is, internship or apprenticeship, right? And then maybe you get to become an electrician or a plumber or whatever in the union. And then once you're in the union, then you have some power, right? But you had to go through this you had to go through some formality. The strength and conditioning profession does not have that. And they don't have a single governing body. There's,
All right, there we go. It's on. Bob, and then we'll get Jim.
Rob, we're no longer friends. Next. I have no fucking patience for somebody who doesn't agree with me. Well, wait a minute. I'm married. I do have patience for that. Well, yeah. So here's what I say about licensure and union too. On the other side of that, I'm not against them. It's more like it's almost like the single leg, double leg thing, right? I'm not against single leg or double leg. I am against what you're saying you're using it for and what you're getting out of it, especially when it's not fucking accurate, right? So when they say licensure, they'll help us with money. No, that's not it. That's not it. That's not going to cure your woe. It's the same thing with the union thing, right? So I'm not against licensure in that form. I'm against licensure the way people say, oh, we got to get licensure because that's going to help us, make our industry more credible. That's one of the things. And I'd say, well, it's a step in the right direction, but and I know Rob will agree with me here. Not every lawyer, doctor, therapist are good. They're licensed, right? So that's how I defeat that call. Although licensure, yeah, there's no question that licensure adds on to the credibility there. So that's my only, I maybe misunderstand there a little bit. I like the idea of it, but again, that still goes back to the whole governing body thing and who will do it and who won't,
So Bob, why don't you think the profession has higher value in the institution or some institutions or some pro teams' eyes? Why do you think that is?
I'm glad you asked me that, Rob. I'm going to say the reason why, and I know Lauren would agree if he was here, Jim will agree. The hiring practices. It's the hiring practices and the leadership. That's what dictates who's getting paid a lot of money and who doesn't. That's what dictates that guy that's going to go in there and not be certified when there's, I wouldn't say a ton of them, but there's enough of them collegiately, and that's against the rules, and they're still doing it because that coach and then the guy that usually, or woman who usually sits in my position has no unearthly idea what the trainer, the strength coach, the sports scientist does and is supervising and evaluating their performance and then making that a university document when they couldn't even. I know my guy came down to get coffee because I had a Keurig in my room. If it wasn't for that, he would have never came in the weight room. That's the God's honest truth. And that might have been, and the other guy after him came in even less because he doesn't drink coffee. So you could say, well, damn, maybe you should have put a team machine in there. You gotta morph yourself into this thing and recruit. So yeah, that's why, because those people are in charge of, and now we're seeing it in the NFL, we're seeing it in the MLB, we're seeing it in the NBA, we're seeing it in the MLS. That those people now, it's even those relationships that we were talking about before, because they're even less. That means, I also kind of don't really need to know what you do either, because I don't care really. I'm doing it because I'm keeping up with the Joneses, and so they're hiring folks who are. We've said this a million times, right? That person, does not qualify to do that job, or wow, that guy's terrible, that woman's terrible, whatever, because they're being hired by somebody that wouldn't know the difference between skilled and unskilled. And that's going to keep happening, right? Because, as we're sitting here right now, that 35-year-old GM, because they're there now, they're looking at, and I was told this by a major league manager, you don't want to come here because you'll be seen as a threat, even though you're not. And when I said, yeah, I know all those know-it-alls in the front office, the reply was, and the clubhouse and on the field. Don't forget those places. So I think it's devalued because of those guys. And then you get, they get to dictate the fee structure too, right? Now what's happening, Rob, is it's a little different than years ago. Well, you may know this too, but for all of you here, they're not allowing head coaches, let's say, at the higher levels, because the money was getting out of control, which is to say that it's in control at all. But they were saying, okay, what do you need? Oh, I'm going to get an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. How much you want to pay the offensive coordinator? $1 million. And then he comes back, oh, he's going to need $1.2 million. Oh, we just got offered a job at South Carolina. We're going to need $1.35 million. Now what they're doing, the administrators finally, after all these years, said, okay, that seems dumb. So we're just going to give you $5 million. You can do whatever you want with it. You can pay the equipment guy $4 million and divide the other $1 million up. If it's up to you, don't come back to us. And so now you get to go to that part where, they get to determine that a little bit. And in some instances, we've seen where the head football coach, I'm talking about that because that's where the money is currently at collegiate sports, has shown that, in fact, he does value the head strength coach and is paying him accordingly. Then you have the rest of the hypocrites that are saying, Rob Panarello is the most important guy on my staff. He's fantastic, which is why I'm paying him in the 6th spot, right? Or the 8th spot. Or that's why he also has to do special teams and academics. That's why I would say that's why it's devalued financially or overvalued financially, however you want to say that. But in terms of having the respect of hiring somebody who's of a quality nature for that specific spot, it's because it's just like Bob Bowlesby said of the Big 12. We need to look at hiring practices and oversight. Those are the two biggest things: leadership and the hiring.
Well, let's say athletic trainers don't have the same spread of salary that, say, strength coaches have, where either you're a superstar or you're wiping down plates, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, Jim, jump in.
Yeah. So Bob touched on one of the things that I've ferociously scribbled notes down on. It's the who's making this decision, right? So I've got part of it is the minimum standard idea, right, Rob? Like, how are we gonna be unified in the sense of what is the governing credential, right? And started off with the NSCA and the CSCS, then the collegiate strength coaches fractioned off. And until there's a hiring standard to say that it's so vague right now that you've got the unfortunate thing that happened up in Oregon. And, it turns out that strength coach had a track and field, basically like a weekend certification credential. Right. And I'm not familiar with the credential. It may be great for that particular pocket of knowledge, but obviously it's the breadth of it is probably not deep enough to say, hey, you should be in charge of the entirety of a program. So that would be number one. And then the idea again of who's doing the hiring, what's that minimum standard, who's going to hold the people hiring to adhering to some sort of minimum standard rather than circumventing and circumnavigating the various options that are out there for people to be the ability to be put into these positions. So I think that if there's not some sort of adherence to that minimum adherence by the hiring entities, we're going to struggle. We're going to struggle with that. And that's where it's important for us to make every effort we can to educate upward. Like Bob said, the guy came in for coffee, he was able to build a relationship. And that's getting harder and harder to do because there are so many more layers in between. At the collegiate level, you've got 4 assistant ADs and different administrators and this and that. And in Major League Baseball, it used to be when I got in, you had a GM and you had one assistant GM. That was it. Then everybody else did their job. Now there's an assistant GM for contracts, an assistant GM to sort of run baseball operations, an assistant GM for scouting, and then there are still the directors underneath those people. And then the layers and layers. It's so disconnected, and now it's so money driven, and we don't have a direct impact on revenue generation. So it's hard to quantify what our value is if we can't say that we contributed X number of dollars to the amount of profit or gross revenue that was generated. We try to make an argument that maybe we're mitigating some lost money through injury prevention, but even that's hard to quantify, because if you start banging the gavel on that, then you've got to be willing to take the blame when something does go wrong. And we know that there's not, there are so many factors that go into that. In the end, like Alvin Meal would say, you want to be a good strength coach, make sure you got good athletes. Be friends with get to be good friends with the GM and the recruiting director, because those are guys are going to make you look like a better strength coach. But until we figure out a way to quantify our value, and we may never do it, it's going to be hard to say that we're worth, or this position is worth a sort of minimum standard, because there's so many variables that are fluid without there being a direct or absolute certification that we all have to operate under, and that the people doing the hiring are willing to adhere to that, even in a more practical sense, and just say, well, I'm not going to go outside of this 1 or 2 certifications in order for the person to be at least the minimum standard of qualification. So.
Yeah, and maybe when we go to an NSCA convention, maybe there should be more people talking about these types of issues as opposed to like stability versus instability training. Because I don't think this is being talked about enough in terms of the business of improving our profession.
You have to be comfortable and be confident enough to try to have those conversations with the people upward. And it's less likely that they are going to seek you out. So I think you have to find an opportunity to at least make the effort. Then if you've made the effort and it's, you're stiff-armed, or it's just not important enough for them to engage or return the engagement with you, then at least you can say to yourself, I tried. That might not be enough to, put food on the table the next year when you're out of work, but, you're not going to question, I made my effort. I mean, in my situation, now, the GM said, hey, I've got a different vision, and after he said that, and it was, it took about 30 seconds to essentially say that. He said, do you have anything to say? I said, yeah, I'm just disappointed you didn't take the time to talk to us about what your vision might be. Maybe we could have helped you do that.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
his mind was, and that's, again, that's fine. It's her prerogative. I get it. I'm a big boy. We've, those of us that have been in the business long enough, it's likely that something like that's eventually going to happen. And it just made it easier for him to dismiss us because he didn't get to know us, but I have other relationships, in the past, like I miss the days when you could go and sit down and have a conversation with the people that were really the actual real people that were your bosses, the ultimate and final decision makers. It doesn't happen like it used to. It just doesn't. I think it takes a willingness on our part to maybe put ourselves in an uncomfortable situation to communicate with people that are not necessarily the type of people we will spend our time with or have the most dialogue with, especially these days if they're MBAs and JDs and they're making these decisions, and you might be a little bit intimidated to go in and speak to them. But I think that conversely, some of those people are also intimidated to come and speak to us because they truthfully are not as sort of worldly wise as I would say a lot of us are. And I think that can be just as intimidating to them and easily allows them to easily make decisions to be dismissive of us and the value that we bring.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Scott, I wanted to get you in. You've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, I appreciate it. My name's Scott Charlin. I was a collegiate strength and conditioning coach for about 20 years and now work for a healthcare system and do all their strength and conditioning for a bunch of youth sports clubs. And I think, the question is, why isn't there higher value in strength and conditioning? I think at the collegiate level, there is a lot of value, inherent value, or there wouldn't be strength coaches at colleges. Every Division I institution, most Division II institutions now have at least said that, yes, there is value to have these coaches on campus. And where that wasn't necessarily the case in the 80s and the 90s. So I think that they see there's value. That the reason they're paid so poorly is because we just haven't fought for that. Think of it the same way as a carpenter or a welder. You think companies just out of the goodness of their heart are paying those employees a great salary just because they value welding? Not at all. They pay those employees because they're forced to by the unions. And I think it's much the same way as us. If we were trying to get our act together, we could potentially raise those salaries. Again, nobody is paying the gentleman from Illinois his teacher salary. Hey, if Illinois could get away with paying them what Missouri pays them, they would. They just can't get away with it. And I think it's the same way with strength and conditioning. I know, with so many disciplines in college and high school and professionals, I think there's obviously some going to be some trouble there, but I fully believe at the collegiate level, this could be done. And I think, and Bob, I don't know if you were in the ground stages of the Collegiate Strength and Conditioning Coaches Association, but to me, I feel like that's a union. We just don't get anything out of it. There's however many thousands of people in that union. We pay dues, quote unquote, every year, but no one is ever advocating for us. It was my intention, and when I joined that when there was a job open, Chuck Stiggins would be on the phone calling the AD hiring that job, saying, "Hey, here's our certification. Here's why you need to hire us." But there was just no advocacy from that group. So we essentially pay our union dues so that we can have a weekend vacation in Orlando every year. But I think schools do see the value in it. I think we've just kind of negotiated ourselves out of it because there is no union, there is no one advocating for us. As far as the revenue, the ATCs don't generate any. The academic folks on campus don't generate anybody. The equipment manager doesn't generate anybody. It's only the coaches and the head coach and the athlete that you can make any kind of case for generates revenue. But I don't think that's a reason why we shouldn't push for this. And again, I fully believe at the collegiate level that this could happen.
Yeah, Brian, you wanted to jump in as well again?
Yeah, I think that one of the things, being an educator and a coach, and then floating around a bunch of different spheres of human performance, it was mentioned earlier, but like perception is a thing, right? So a bunch of my buddies joke that I'm a history coach, because a lot of the people who teach social studies just as an excuse to be able to get paid to coach, you know? And so my job every day is when I go into the classroom, I try to change that attitude and perception, you know, and when luckily, when most students reflect on, you know, the job that I do in their own little individual evaluations that we have in our school district, they say, never liked history before. Now I do. He teaches it in a different way. And that's me as an individual. And hopefully I win more of those than I lose. But I think that as a profession, I would imagine outside looking in that some of these people, to answer Rob's question, why don't we get these things? I think they're dismissive of the intelligence of the group, of the real value of the group, and they believe that they can replace those people, that it's really easy to find another meathead to go throw some iron around. And the reality is we all know that that is not true, right? Just like every other profession, you know, there are levels and degrees to everybody's abilities, but that through education, through a community of peers that force each other to get better, you raise the floor for everyone, you know? And then just like Scott said, I think if you guys get together and not in terms of demand of, hey, pay us more money right now, but as a group in those conversations, when you have those national meetings, like the most important thing for us when we have our state clinics, and I know it's only the state, but when we have our business meeting is where everything gets done. And when you're in there, you start to figure out who has the most respect, who has a lot of influence, who pushes the needle. And then you have unified fronts in the ideas and things that you want to get done and you want to accomplish. So all of these problems that were raised or concerns or worries, and in this particular conversation, you guys then need to come up with some ideas of, all right, how do we change that narrative? What do we need to do? What are things that we think we can implement to make our body as a group of people more respected than the coach yanking on somebody's belt loop to pull them back off the field, or to be the wacko job with the Schmedium t-shirt on, but acting like a raving lunatic. Like there's times to act like a raving lunatic, but when that is the poster child for the position versus an educated, thoughtful guy who can also get up in your business when he needs to. And then the biggest thing is you guys as strength and conditioning coaches, especially at the collegiate level, you spend more time with the athletes than anybody else. You're spending more time. Just like as an educator, we spend more time traditionally for a kid from 6 years old to 18 years old than their parents do. We spend more time with them, you know, especially if we're coaching, than we really do. And so there's a lot of value there that needs to be honored. And the abilities that you guys have and the things that you do and the time that you spend with them needs to be rewarded with some sort of pay, job protection, and all that kind of stuff. Like one of the things they're talking about, the guy who had somebody die in Oregon or whatever, he only had a weekend certification. Exactly the problem. Not that the certification is going to keep that guy from making a dumb decision, but it can reduce the chance of that happening, right? And on top of that, you have the opportunity to have more and more people that can mentor that person who have gone through the same process to limit that or to change the narrative. Because, you know, some people like us, we can look at that guy with the Schmedium shirt going nuts and slapping people and headbutting people and think that's dumb because we're old and we know the more headbutt and head trauma we get, the worse we're off. I struggle every day just to get by, you know, where I'm at with my mental faculties. All right. But younger guys who get into the business, you know, where do they come from? What profession? They say that guy's like, man, that guy's so hyped. That's what I want because that makes interesting Sports Center highlights or whatever. There's people that like that think that's awesome and want to emulate that. And so having some sort of criteria, curriculum, standardization, unionization to have protections, respect, and changing the narrative about the job, that is in my opinion, the most important for all of college athletics, because you're the ones who keep them healthy. You're the ones who know what's going on day to day. You're the ones that move the needle in terms of their human performance, you know? And the other thing that was mentioned is that you guys have to advocate. You have to go in and be somewhat annoying. Like if there is a new hire that's going to be responsible over your job, you know, first thing that needs to happen, you shoot off an email, congratulations, love, grab a coffee with you and talk about the business, you know. And if you're not doing that, if you're waiting for the guillotine to slice down, it's already too late. You got to get involved. You got to be an advocate for yourself right away and every year. And here's the thing, if you're annoying them, oh, well, it's better to annoy them than to sit back and never interact with them and them having a perception of you that may or may not be accurate. And that's the key issue that we've got. We've got the myopic perception and the global perception that is a problem, but you can only take care of your house. So the more you can do it on an individual level, the better. And then when you go to these national conventions, you need to get your ass into the business meeting and start coming up with some plans, because that's the only way. Like in our state, we've got javelin now that we didn't have javelin before. We've got extra classes in track and field. We've got auto qualifier changes that we've put into place. We've got better opportunities to coach our kids in the off season. None of that, I was told when I came in, that can't be done. It's impossible, right? And I'm only in a small neck of the woods in Missouri, but I said, well, why can't that be done? Well, you know, this, and this. And I'm like, bullshit. So then I knew it was going to be a long process and there were some failures, but over time, we were able to figure out who do we need to influence? How do we create the argument? What's the argument they're going to come back with us at? What's our counter to that? All right, here's the presentation.
I'm just gonna ask quickly Mike Hurst to comment on this. Mike, you're looking, you know, from the outside in. You obviously you worked as a track coach, you work as a track coach, and you're in Australia. What are you getting from all this that you're hearing from us? What are your suggestions?
Maybe I'm naive, but I was part of a union for my entire working life in the media, sports media. And if you weren't part of the media in those days, you didn't get a job. You were just boycotted out of it. But ultimately, I think you need to let your work speak for itself. And if you're damn good at what you do, whether you're part of a union or not, then you have a chance to work in an industry. That's probably contrary to maybe a lot of views here, but yeah, look, honestly, I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I think it should, because there needs to be a bit more standardization of knowledge and best practice than there is currently in track and field. And I'll give you an example. I'm now working with a guy whose previous coach set him a session of 5 times 500 meters off 3 minutes, intense, the day before he was due to race. And the guy couldn't finish the race. He was legless. And that's why he left his previous coach, I guess. But yeah, the previous coach may have had a plan. There may have been some deception involved. He just wanted this guy to run really slowly so that he could get a better handicap in the pro ranks of Australian track and field. I'm not sure. And the guys, all these coaches have got their own systems. I'm dubious though, but he came up to me and he only did 3 or 4 sessions with me and was well rested. He improved his 100 meters from 11.4 to 10.8, and his 200 meters improved from 22.8 to 21.7. And you just think, you know, where's that improvement come from? It's an improvement because the knowledge is maybe a little bit better, and you know, and maybe there's a bit more of a world awareness of it all, possibly. So that's kind of where I'm at. So I think membership of unions and membership of coaching associations can be very beneficial, and perhaps that is important. And I think if you cut loose with let somebody run rampant in a pro association, you'd pretty soon find out whether there was value in having a highly qualified strength and conditioning coach or not, because it would reflect in the results. I don't know if I'm still with you or not, but anyway.
No, that I wanted to get your input because I know we talk a lot about these sorts of quality issues, efficacy issues around coaching. I figure we'll wrap up here. We'll get Bob and then Rob just to kind of close us out. Bob, what are your final thoughts on this? Have we accomplished anything here?
Well, that Rob Panarello and mine friendship is definitely, it's at odds. It's at odds. It's a frightening day for me and my family. But I will say that, wow, I mean, being united is definitely something we need to do. And look, starting from scratch and organizing a group of strength coaches is not new to me, certainly not new to Jim Malone. I and a few others helped to start the very first professional baseball strength and conditioning coaches society. And by the way, we were told not to use the term association by MLBPA. So, okay, yeah, sorry. That wasn't a pleasant thing to hear, right? You're like, oh shit, so, but we started out at the Disneyland Hotel. We broke into a room that it wasn't ours. We broke into it. We had no money. There were 6 or 7 of us, a cooler full of beer, dry erase pen and a whiteboard, and just said, we all sat in the room, 6 of us. And we said, okay, you get up there and tell us what you do with your pitchers. Jim, how many are attending that now?
Well over 200. I mean, you got 30 teams that are sending at least 4 guys, and more than likely 6 to 7 plus now the inclusion of sort of satellite memberships that are available to the PTs, to the emerging sports science. The fact that we have 60 plus vendors participating in the vendor show, and countless athletic trainers that wander into the talks, and also front office personnel, that the ones that do take an interest in what we're doing, that come in. So we've gone from, and what Bob is talking about, that was when we would just steal off for a few hours as part of the NSCA January conference, when it was football, then sports specific, football, baseball, and sports specific. Now it's a coaches conference. To when we were actually invited by MLB to participate in the winter meetings for the first time in December of 2005. And I will tell you, even then, I don't know that we had 40 guys in there. I'd have to go back because I think we had about 7 vendors that were basically, solicited just to cover some of the costs. Now we spend $50,000 on a dinner for everybody. So it's insane.
So listen, it's not as if this profession has not made, progress. I mean, our first thing there was, I knew the guy at Oakley. He gave us all watches. And then Tom Profit from Life Fitness ended up sponsoring a dinner that probably had 2 tables at it, and we wanted to follow the athletic trainers, which, by the way, if we want to be successful, we should really look at what they've done. They've done an unbelievable job of committing to each other, and they don't have a union. And the reason why they don't make income is because you have to have an athletic trainer. That's a medical rule. And so you can't do anything. You can play without a strength coach. That's been shown already. So that, I just think that being unified and getting together is it's going to be difficult just to unify everybody. One, when you talk about union and licensure as another, I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm not the guy who says you can't do that, but the likelihood and the efforts that it'll take to try to do that is probably better spent somewhere else, and I think that right now I'm doing my part. I'm in the senior associate athletic director role. I'm the one that does the evaluating. I'm the one that does the hiring. I know what those cats do and how they're going to help us. And somebody asked me before, like, how do we get other guys to do that? Well, I mean, hopefully it doesn't take you till you're 63 to get that job, because I think there's a lot of smart guys who now I'm getting more emails like, Coach, I finally realized I didn't want to be in the weight room from dark to dark every day, but I love the profession. I want to help. And so we're getting a few of those. That's the part. We've got to get, like Rob said, somebody's got to get up there in the assistant general manager's role, in the senior associate athletic director's role, in the vice president role before. So you not only have a seat at the table, which we have had, but we have no say, even though we're at the table. We want to have a seat and a say. And so this is right now, this is my best shot at solving that problem. Getting us all together, which, you know, we're far apart. I mean, we got guys making 25,000 and 700,000. That's a tough one to buy when you're talking about collective bargaining. At some point, it's going to be tough for, you know, again, the one thing that unions do is they restrict labor supply and they increase labor demands. Well, right now, you've got hundreds of strength coaches unemployed. They can't be put into jobs because there's no jobs to have, right? Especially during this time. So, you know, again, the union thing is it's not as romantic as you think. But getting together and having a commonality and saying, look, these are the salaries of 6 strength coaches at the Olympic level at the Power 5. I'm making 2/3 of that. Have that conversation. Like Jim said, you got to be able to talk money. Goddamn, I try to tell people this all the time. At the higher levels, for sure, they talk, every decision they make is based on money. Collegiately, every single decision is based directly or indirectly on money. They talk about money all day long. We aren't used to doing that, especially guys who love the profession, because we do that first. But we've got to get comfortable with saying, here's my list of salaries. Here's the incentives I want. Here's my educational budget. We're not good at that. And I say I wasn't good at that in the beginning. And, you know, in terms of Ryan's case, when he talks about being annoying, you know, whether you're right or wrong, I can do without annoying. So I'll just get the next 500 guys who are available at that one spot. I mean, there's enough guys that go ahead and that aren't that much different than the person there, but that person's really different, then he's not annoying. I love it, right? And then when you look at unions in terms of teachers, oh, union's going to really help you. You're shitting me, right? Teachers are the most underpaid and undervalued profession in the world, period. They're now coming out of their pockets for school supplies. I don't want to hear that bullshit about unions. That doesn't help the teachers. Until teachers get going, you can't sell me on strength coaches unionizing.
Very good point. Rob, you want to finish us out here?
Yeah, I just think, you know, I echo what Bob said. I think you're talking in this conversation, I think we talked about a little bit about 2 different things. I think, you know, when Bob started that baseball society, I mean, I think that's a venue for people to learn to become better. All right. And you know, the best people hopefully will prevail, like Mike stated. I think that's more applicable to the private sector, where people hear about you and your reputation, they'll spend the money with you, versus the team setting where if a head coach comes in and he has his guy, it doesn't matter what you know, right? He has his guy. But the other factor of this, and you know, I've thrown out some things, not to be negative. I just want people to start to think this way. As Bob says, it's about the money. Don't kid yourself. It's all about the money. It's about the business. That's why football and basketball would be the last teams to be cut, right? And so the other identity of an individual is the person who's qualified to sit at the table. You need a seat at the table, and that person may not be a strength coach, but a representative of the strength coaches, right? And so they can, and that's why I asked the question before, they can justify the value. And they can justify certain individuals saying, look, when you had this guy, your teams were winning, your injuries were down, et cetera. And I agree with Scott said before, if you're going to take the injuries down, then you got to take the bitter pill when the injuries are up. But you've got to show your value. And if the team's playing well and the guys are performing and they're not injured and they're on the field, they got a better chance to win. And if they win, they're going to a bowl game, revenue. If they win, they're going to more playoff games, revenue. That's how you show your value, right? But it may not necessarily be this. You have to have a seat at the table because that's where the GM is sitting across from you. And he hears it directly. And it's justified with evidence directly to him. And so, yes, we have to be very good at what we do. But then you also need a seat at the table so that you can get to speak directly to the people who make the hires, who determine the salaries, et cetera. And so, you know, just think about that. That's your value. And I go full circle again. My wife tells me my worst fault is I'm a repeater, but I agree 100% with Bob. It's always about the money. Think of this. We know more injuries occur on turf than natural grass. So why aren't all stadiums natural grass? Maybe because after the 16 games, there's concerts, there's all these other revenue producing venues that would destroy the field and would cost you a lot more money to keep replacing grass than to do a turf field every 3 to 5 years. But what about the injuries? I don't know, maybe we could always get more players. I'm not saying I've heard that. I'm not saying it's a mentality, but it's just a way to think about it. So you've got to demonstrate your value, and then you've got to have why you need me. What do I give you regards to financial benefits, and who's going to make that presentation after they get a seat at the table?
Very, very sobering thoughts there. And, you know, if it is all about the money, like Eric has just commented here, why aren't we spending more time talking about that as part of our professional education and our continuing education?
Well, think of it this way. During this pandemic, how many businesses have gone out of business? Look what Lauren said before. Because there was no money, right? If an institution didn't have a dowry, or if an institution didn't have money, if nobody went to a professional team game, why do you think they've NFL pushed for games this year? And even though they had empty stadiums, they wanted TV revenues. If there's no revenue, there's no team, there's no institution, there's no business. So there are no jobs without their existence. That's why it's about the money. Sometimes it's a little bit too much greed, and sometimes it's out of necessity, and probably falls in the middle the majority of the time. But unless there's a business entity, there are no jobs. And to survive, you need to make money. That's why it's about the money.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to rebrand this as the Show Me the Money Zoom chat here, because maybe we have to push that. I don't know. But thanks everyone.
Hey, one last thing.
Yep.
Hey, Bob, I still consider you a friend.
I'm
Yeah.
getting a little verklempt right now.
It's an all pro back pedal right there.
Awesome, everyone. Thanks for jumping on. And we will have to revisit this at some point and talk about that value issue that everybody seems to touch on, the professionalism and the value of the field. So thanks
Bob,
again.
AM starts, mate, please.
What was that, Mike?
No more 6 a.m. starts, please.
Okay,
Bob.
sorry. Yeah, I was trying to push it later for you.
Well, does everybody know where Mike's coming from? Tell him, Derek.
Sydney, Australia. Yeah, 6 a.m. start for Mike. So we'll push it back a bit next time. Okay.
We'll make sure we dim Norma Ray Hansen's enthusiasm on the.
Thank you.
On the thing. Hey,
All
listen,
right.
everybody here, seriously, don't feel bad about talking about money when you go into your supervisor. And help your teachers. If you guys have kids, help your teachers out. That's disgusting that they have to reach in their pockets to buy binders and crayons and pencils.
I don't think your supervisors don't go in speaking about money, right? Right.
Yep. All right. All that's left to be said is go Chiefs.
Go.
Have a good
Bye, Derek.
rest of your Sunday.